your opinion is not the most important opinion. Your opinion is valid when it's sort of connected into a community. So, share your frustration about your company, the company you work for abandoning its climate policies to the board. Go and speak to other employees, find out if there's a way that you can organize together, present it to the board. If that doesn't work, present it to journalists, but you have to be strategic about it. Like shouting out on the void, shouting into the void on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever, it's meaningless. And equally, complaining to your friends isn't actually achieving anything either. Exactly. So people really need to think that every word that you say is a method of communication, has the potential to connect and engage and deploy. Essentially, like neoliberalism incentivizes individualism and capitalism incentivizes protecting the bottom line. But I think it's a really dangerous ploy to blame this on morality when there's a lot more complex stuff going on, and morality is then kind of added on, like amorality is then added on to the top. And I think that's a real failure, frankly, of the left in the Western world, to make this about good people and bad people.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the CEO Retort. I'm your host, Tim El-Sheikh, and in this episode, I am meeting Rachel Donald, the brilliant investigative journalist who specializes in climate and energy corruption. And she's such a champion because she is right now in the middle of recording her first documentary, and she's traveling all over the place, yet she managed to find some time to join me on this discussion. So even though I'm trying to be cheerful here, but my God, the world is in crisis in such a horrendous way. And I think you might think, well, Tim, that's kind of obvious. Well, when we delve deeper into this whole situation and, asking the simple question about why our world is in crisis, why Earth is in crisis, and it's not just about the climate change, even though it is a big problem, but it goes beyond that. I mean, you just have to look at the things that are happening around the world right now, in terms of economics, politics, the rise of violence against women, the rise of depression amongst young men, and the list just goes on and on and on. And of course, this is an area that I think is so important to me personally, certainly from the point of view of tech and AI, because we promised you for decades that our job is to make the world a better place with technology. And I'm the first to put my hands up and say that we failed. Yes, technology is better. Yes, things are more interesting. But is the world a better place? Let's be honest. So at least I'm being honest about it. And I think now is the time for us to be open and discuss solutions, because it's not just about sitting here and talking and debating. Yes, that's not bad. It's useful, but it's not taking action. And one of the things that Rachel does a lot on her podcast, and hopefully you'll find out from this discussion as well, that she always tries to find a way forward. What is the alternative approach? Now, the question, of course, are people listening? Hopefully, yes. And her following is growing really well in the same way that mine and LinkedIn as well. So, of course, there's this desire and this yearn from the general public to start listening to independent voices, because the news media have failed. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. And in fact, in my case, I investigated misinformation since 2012, ironically using AI. And the legacy media are responsible for spreading a lot of misinformation, though sometimes perhaps unintentionally, but they are trying to sell you information. They're not trying to inform you. I think that's really the key problem. And what we have witnessed, of course, since the election of Donald Trump in 2024, that the viewership of the likes of CNN and Fox News, etc., collapsed. But of course, podcasts have risen. Why? Because people want independent voices now. People have had enough of the news. And in fact, I see so many of my friends, even my wife as well, that they started talking about that, they don't want to listen to the news anymore. They've had enough. It's depressing, etc., etc. And then every time something happens, they always come to me and say, hey, Tim, what's going on? Tell me. I think, I sympathize with that, but I'm afraid you've got to be in touch with the news. You've got to be aware of what's going on. Maybe you don't have to do what I do, of course, because of my work and my job as a CEO of an AI company. I have to be aware of what's going on. I mean, things are changing literally every 5 minutes in AI. But frankly, after this discussion with Rachel, I feel like, we kind of get our priorities right. And hopefully you guys will see exactly what we're talking about. I don't want to give you any spoilers. And speaking of news, this episode was kindly supported by our friends at Ground News. As an entrepreneur, I like to follow the news really, really closely, be it in politics, the environment, health, fitness, and of course AI, which is my field of work. But the problem with the news sector today is that staying up to date with events around the world can be really, really difficult, because it's impossible to consult a single source for the full story. The narratives that shape public opinion often just reinforce media and corporate-backed vested interest, and of course they push for whatever public or political biases of their readers. Not to mention, of course, they push a lot of clickbait stories to just attract clicks rather than trying to inform you properly. And this is why I fell in love with Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place so you can compare coverage. For every news source, you can see if they have political bias, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. And they've got this amazing tool called the blind spot feed, which highlights news disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. I even see this with AI. For example, you'll see the left-leaning AI coverage tend to be kind of very doom and gloom, but then on the other side, with the right-leaning, AI is the savior of humanity and everything. I mean, it's quite ridiculous in both cases. So it's so important to have a tool like Blind Spot because it shows you the balance of this coverage so that you can actually see what the real story is, what's the crux of the story, which is super important, especially for somebody like me, because many customers around the world rely on me and my team to make sure that we inform them about AI and technology as accurately as we possibly can. But even for me personally, as somebody that likes to follow all the other stories, I want to make sure that my cognitive bias is in check. So check out this tool, it's absolutely phenomenal. You can subscribe through my link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. It's the one that I use to get unlimited access to every single feature and tool that they have, and it works out less than $5 a month. It's basically like a cup of coffee a month. And your subscription not only helps our channel and our podcast, but it also supports Ground News as it makes the media landscape more transparent. They're not reliant on VCs, kind of like my company. They are absolutely 100% funded by their membership. So this is something that I really, really love about them as well. It's their level of independence. And I think we should all support companies like that to make sure that we stay informed as accurately as we possibly can. So check out the link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. And tell me what you think. Do you like it? Is it working for you? I would love to get your feedback. So thank you, Ground News, for supporting this video. And now, my friends, without further ado, Rachel Donald.
I came across your podcast, which it's kind of aligned with the sort of work that I do in general. Although from your point of view, obviously you're a journalist. I'm a tech entrepreneur, but I'm sort of I'm trying to be one of the good guys, right? I was part of the problem. Now I'm trying to be part of the solution in the world of AI. So I agree with you that we as a human society globally, we pretty much kind of fuck things up. And AI sort of makes it even worse today. And obviously we can delve deeper into that. But I know that I'm sure you're getting a lot of people, because I'm getting these sort of people all the time that say, Tim, crisis, what crisis? Oh, Tim, you're being hyperbolic, or you just don't like VCs, or yada, 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 which I'm like, no. So to kind of put that to bed and get real, why is Earth on crisis? I know you get this question 5 billion times, but it's just for the listeners, just to make sure.
So there's one caveat I would mention. We are not in crisis because of human society. It's a very small fraction of human society that is causing enormous amounts of pollution and putting stress on the Earth systems due to resource extraction. And that also is not necessarily like the fault of malicious intent or demonic people, but rather typically when organisms have access to a dense energy source, they do more activity. And for the last almost 200 years, coming up to 200 years, we've had access to fossil fuels, which are incredibly energy dense, second only to nuclear, and that have just, put human development, and I don't use that term in the sort of typical word, but the development of human civilization into third gear and just accelerated. Also, fossil fuels were coupled with capitalism, which is an economic system that was meant to be used for growth. That was what Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations, and also did warn this is a system that is only meant to develop quickly for growth, and then it's meant to transition into something else because it's fundamentally limited. You cannot just continue to exist with growth. Now, what we see when we understand that from like a materials perspective is that there's lots of literature to show that our economies are only really a measurement of how much material we're extracting from the planet. So if you think about GDP, that's kind of like a measurement of damage, essentially. And because there were only 2 billion of us 100 years ago, it kind of looked like Earth was limitless. You know, obviously the planet is finite, but God, so many trees to cut down and so much oil to pull up and so much gas to extract and so much stuff to build. And now we're running out. And we're not running out in the sense that tomorrow it's going to be all gone, but we're running out in the sense that because of everything we're extracting, we've changed Earth's systems to the point that she can no longer regenerate in her cycles to kind of absorb the damage that we're doing and maintain stability. So that is why the planet is in crisis. Sort of combination of energy, available energy, economic system, human impetus, and waste. And we're now in a stage where we need to be actively regenerating the Earth system so that she can continue to absorb the pollution that we're putting out. We need to be actively reducing the amount of pollution that we're putting out. We need to grapple with the fact that for all the talk of wealth and development and capitalism and GDP, you know, the growth of national economies is decoupled from material well-being for people. It did so, I think, after 2008. So it's just not translating into what it was all originally meant to be for, allegedly, which is, you know, to lift people up out of poverty. That's just no longer the case. And it does seem to be madness to be continuing with something that benefits very few at the expense of quite literally the only planet in the known universe that supports life. Yeah. So there's also that element of like, we're in a political crisis and a crisis of imagination. Like we really need to grasp that that is the reality of the situation. We're going to screw up our planet for what now?
Greed.
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as greed though, because I think greed kind of predicates like a moral behavior, and I don't think there's much to do with it. I don't think there's much about this that is to do with morality. I think that it's a biological impetus, right, to seek an energy surplus, because like if you think about the human body, like you need a certain amount of calories just to function every day. Like if I was to lie down, like not get out of bed, be horizontal and just breathe, I think my basal rate is like, I don't know, 1200, 1400 calories. So I need that just to maintain myself. And then I need extra in order to then do things. Like you need energy in order to spend energy because you can't create energy out of nothing. So it's very normal for creatures to seek an energy surplus. And predators tend to seek surpluses in like bigger chunks. Like herbivores will just graze all day. It's kind of like they're eating lots of little batteries throughout the day, whereas predators will kind of eat like one big battery a week or 2 weeks or, you know, a month on a bad month. So it's just kind of how like biology functions. And the problem with human beings is we got access to the biggest battery in the world and didn't think about what was happening with the energy that we were using from it, essentially. So, for example, fossil fuels, most of the energy, or a third of the energy from fossil fuels is released into the atmosphere as heat. Right? We're not even using them efficiently. And when you release that amount of energy, carbon, whatever it is, into a system, it's going to then destabilize the system. Yeah. So there's obviously elements of greed when we're talking about, you know, the fact that capitalism incentivizes like neoliberalism incentivizes individualism and capitalism incentivizes protecting the bottom line. But I think it's a really dangerous ploy to blame this on morality when there's a lot more complex stuff going on, and morality is then kind of added on, like amorality is then added on to the top. And I think that's a real failure, frankly, of the left in the Western world, to make this about good people and bad people.
That's an interesting point, because effectively people, you know, the climate deniers, right, or the climate change deniers, they do feel somewhat offended if you try to say to them, hey, you know, you're you're being irresponsible, or that, it's your fault that the planet is dying because you just ignore the scientific facts and stuff. And the other, I'm a scientist, the science is out there. And the one thing, one of the reasons why I walked away from science gazillions of years ago before I decided to jump into the entrepreneurship abyss, it's the fact that we talk to ourselves too much. It's like we expect people to align with us automatically. So we're not actually, we're not putting the effort to engage. We're just saying, hey, here's the data, just shove it into people's faces and take it. And if you don't like it, then you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem. I think this is what brought the current political situation that we're seeing around the world.
Yes and no. I think that it was never scientists' role to be the communicators, right? Like, that's why you're meant to have journalists and science journalists and political leaders who are trustworthy. And, so this is the thing, like, we're asking a hell of a lot of people who are like, hey, do the research and then find the best way to tell people. No. Yeah. Like, it's on other people. It's on the narrative and the storytellers to find the best way to explain the science. And then those people have an uphill battle because you have, an entire sort of like mainstream media propaganda machine that, first of all, it has like very serious ties to government that is funded by the fossil energy industry, and also has to kind of, how do I put this, like, isn't particularly good at understanding complexity, because that's not been, how news has developed as a sector. And you've got non-scientists trying to understand very complex science, and then also infantilizing their audience, thinking they can't understand it, and so dumbing it down. So I really don't think it's like scientists' fault to say that people aren't understanding the data. Like, we have different data on this that shows that people, it's only about 10% of the population that trust facts when they hear new facts. And then another 20% of the population trust emotional responses. And then the rest, they believe information because it comes from a person that they trust. And that's why you have, people like Donald Trump who can go out and lie objectively, but whose fan base still believes them because he's already developed, trust with them, essentially. So there's a lot of different moving parts, but I do think that it's taken certainly the climate movement a long time to realize, numbers don't do it for people. We're going to have to find something else. And the left is still massively grappling with not insulting people that disagree with them, because you just can't. You absolutely can't. It's just such a failure.
It's frustrating. I mean, this is why I try not to be politically attached to any particular movement. I mean, I see myself as a liberal. I believe in progress, etc. But I suppose I see it from the point of view of an innovator, technologist, entrepreneur, where basically I try to bring new things to make the world a better place. I'm one of the old school tech entrepreneurs that actually genuinely believed in that, until, of course, the capitalists who call themselves capitalists, I call them digital feudalists, because that's what they're doing right now is not capitalism. We can delve into that as well. But no, I feel, no, you're right. I mean, the media has a huge role to play, because actually my proper AI career, like what rose me to my position, was my second startup, or third startup, I can't remember which one now, is the one that got us into Google Campus alongside the likes of DeepMind and basically the who of AI. So I was part of that cohort. So that's like back in 2012, 13. And I can assure you that we were not building AI to make some kind of AGI bullshit, right? That's bullshit. There's no such thing as AGI. I'll tell you this right now. I'm telling to the listeners, there's no AGI, all right? Just forget that nonsense. But, but generally we tried to solve problems. So I remember there was a startup that was trying to use AI to figure out, basically, I can't remember, it was like to use the AI algorithms to figure out how do we potentially prevent climate change or reduce climate change. Obviously, DeepMind, they were using AI to solve scientific problems. And so my startup, the main reason I'm talking about this, we were actually using AI to fight misinformation and deepfakes. That was already a problem in 2012. That it was already there. I sort of discovered it in 2010, and I prioritized science in the sense of how scientific information, especially in healthcare, is completely skewed into all sorts of weird directions caused by the mainstream media. And the thing that I used to pitch to VCs at the time, that the source of the misinformation isn't social media, it's the mainstream media. Now, whether it's intentional or not, you can tell me that, I don't know. But for me, I think it's more to do with the fact that it's clickbaity. The titles don't necessarily correlate with the content, etc. But people, as you say, they don't read the content, they see the title, they get emotional about it, they get some kind of an emotional judgment of reality, which is not necessarily real. And it just brews into the disaster we see today. So I see your point, like the media are to blame as well. But for me, I feel that it's a complicated ecosystem. Maybe right now it's way more complicated. It's like, where do we find the solution? What is the route to solve that misunderstanding that the public have about, climate change, any other crisis for that matter? Get politics out of it, I presume?
Well, that's a big question. And I don't believe in solutions, right? I believe that systems evolve and shift. Because solutions sounds too much like a kind of steady state. I don't think that mainstream media is a source of misinformation. I think that it's not quite correct to say that, a kind of headline which is serving its purpose of like grabbing attention is feeding misinformation. You have to remember that like the media is held to an incredibly high standard with regards to laws and regulations and libel suits and all of this kind of thing. And I think part of kind of the stranglehold of like the fear of being wrong when you have a bunch of non-experts writing about expert stuff is that what actually happened is they sort of developed this like two-sided manner when reporting on science, which was like, okay, this person says that, but this person says that. And that kind of gets them off the hook and ensures that they can't get done for bias, essentially. And then that creates the possibility of misinformation because you can then begin to decontextualize a report. And I think probably that is part of the answer to your question. Like we live in a hugely decontextualized world. And I think that is reflective of the neoliberal economic system, which has sought to sort of separate us and cut ties and create a dog-eat-dog world where individuals rule supreme, which is completely ecologically blind and misinformed. Like we all exist as interdependent beings, whether socially, politically, environmentally, ecologically, etc. But because of the amount of information that's out there now, it's impossible to consume all of it. It's impossible to keep up. And so I think part of what people do is to survive is like decontextualize in a sense. And then also because media thinks of itself as it being kind of impossible to properly contextualize each story, then we've kind of fallen into a glut where the real bias isn't what is being said, but is what is being not said. And I think that's kind of the tragedy of the commons here, that the web, the social and political and economic web is still there, but it's been hidden essentially in a hall of mirrors, or it's been, we've been made blind to it. And that's why you have case after case after case after case of corruption happening. And each time it's kind of treated as like a new thing. Like I remember thinking about this a few years ago when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister in the UK, and like the news cycle was just constant outrage. And I was like, this is ridiculous. What a stupid way to report on this. Like, this is what he does. He does illegal things and he says stupid things. And the more that we treat each instance as an opportunity for outrage, the more that we decontextualize it. This is actually his normal behavior. And because outrage adds an element of like, oh, it shouldn't be this way. No, it shouldn't be this way, but it is this way. So stop being outraged. Stop kind of wasting time with this emotional response and start contextualizing that this is a very deliberate manner of governing that he is weaponizing here. And
you
you
even
need to
said it.
connect all the dots. I mean, and he even said it, right? So, yeah, I think contextualizing is very important to understanding why the world is in crisis and what to do about it.
That's actually interesting because part of the tradition that I like to do in this podcast, that I ask every guest about the story that led them to where they are today, because we have quite a lot of listeners who are new graduates or budding entrepreneurs or somebody that wants to kind of change their careers. Because I get emails and DMs on LinkedIn, especially. People are saying, Tim, I've got this degree, I've got that degree, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what to do with my life, right? How did you become an entrepreneur? Because obviously I'm known for AI, yet my degree is in biomedical science. I'm not a mathematician, okay? So they're kind of like, so how the hell did that happen? And I'm like, well, this is actually every single person I met and every single guest I've had so far had that kind of interesting story that they started out as one thing, but their journey led them to where they are today because something happened, or they felt that not necessarily they don't have satisfaction with their job, but they feel that they've got something else to offer to the world, right? And I've seen that with your podcast, because I've listened to some of your episodes already, and it's like there's definitely a story, I think, behind why you because you used to be a journalist. I'm not sure, I can't remember if it was with the mainstream media.
Still a journalist.
Yeah. I mean, no, I say proper journalist, as like employed by the usual establishment. The main reason I'm asking that, because I actually follow quite a lot of journalists in America, for example, that quit MSNBC or CNN and everything. They're setting up their own podcast. And I feel that there's this it's like a period where all journalists now, they seem to feel like they now finally can speak out, because they could not speak out while they were working for the BBC or something.
No, I
That's the
disagree with
feeling.
you.
That's why I thought, you know what, I'll ask a journalist to see how, if I'm right with that assumption, but actually, how did you evolve with your career that led you to your current podcast?
Okay, I've got two things to say before I answer that. So first of all, it's a very dangerous time to be a journalist. I probably more so than in past decades. In the United Kingdom, for example, the amount of libel suits being leveled against journalists and individual journalists is particularly bad. And the UK is known for having actually one of the worst legal protections for journalists in the world.
Yes,
only getting worse.
Yes.
Obviously, the new president of the United States has actively targeted journalistic institutions and will likely, go after individual journalists that don't sort of toe the new authoritarian regime's line. Around the world, journalists are disappearing and being murdered with the rise of sort of authoritarian figures, and especially as well as, the world is moving away from the climate pledges and promises that it made over the past decade. As the world is swinging increasingly towards, again, this authoritarian kind of fossil-powered regimes, this network of regimes. So I don't think the journalists feel that they can say anything they want. I think that obviously when you go independent, you are not beholden to the same editorial standards automatically, but you should still be. You should still hold yourself to the same editorial standards of checking your sources. But independence provides a manner for journalists to just give more of their own analysis. I didn't for quite a few years, but I am now at the stage where the things that I write about, I know very, very well. And I get invited to conferences to speak on kind of the interconnection of systems. I'm now leading, or in the pack essentially that's leading with regards to information on this. So yeah, I'm allowed to give my opinion because it's valid. But it doesn't mean that everybody should be all the time, Yeah. I wouldn't give my opinion on anything outside of my area of expertise, and that's probably something else that's lacking.
And that should be the case. I mean, that's what I do here. So I talk about tech, business, but you ask me about quantum physics, I'm an idiot. Yeah, exactly.
With regards to young people who are contacting you asking for, advice and stuff about what to do, I would just like to slip in the little nugget that the Faculty of Actuaries in the United Kingdom has released reports for 2 years in a row saying that the world economy is going to crash in this century. The report last year was this century. The report this year has said by 2070. So for people that are wanting to go into the world of business, to make money, I would suggest that they also skill themselves in other ways, because the world of money is about to shrink very, very dramatically. The more pressure that we put on the Earth systems, the less able she is to absorb our waste. And then things will continue to break down and get worse. And they will be felt in our human economies, those impacts. My story. I did a literature degree, but philosophy, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Got involved with
you're not the only one.
Yeah, of course. I got involved with a student newspaper. I went to work with them like after graduating. They were a private company, and then I quit that. I was 22 and I walked out and I left London, and it was like, that was 2015 when I left London, and it was sort of, I was seen as mad because that was the time where like graduate jobs were few and far between. The economy was rubbish, like even worse than it is now. And I was like, I just don't believe that this is it. I just don't believe that this is all that life has to offer. I don't buy it. I don't buy that like this really polluted and expensive city is like the place to be. I don't buy that I'm like making a difference with the stuff that I'm writing. There's just got to be more. So I went to Europe and I moved around Europe and I did different things. Most of the time I was working as a teacher. I was teaching at universities, lots of different kinds of things. Sometimes teaching the wrong thing because, I got hired in French, didn't understand what I was meant to be doing. And then found myself at a crossroads, or maybe not even a crossroads, but rather sort of the end of the road, just before COVID hit. Like I was out of ideas. I'd thrown myself into so many different ventures. I'd thrown myself into like non-profit work and private business work and consulting and teaching and journalism, and it was always at other people's projects, and they were never enough because I wanted something that was more complete, that was more entangled than any one role could give me. And I felt very frightened because I was 27. I was 27 and I was running out of money and I had no more opportunity. There was nobody else knocking on my door, and I felt really frightened that I'd either missed the biggest opportunity of my life by walking away from one of the many things I walked away from, or that I had absolutely fucked myself by not staying, on one career path, and thus essentially being 5 years behind all of my peers. Because everyone else had stayed and they had 5 years experience from where we'd all been when I walked away when I was 22. And it was a very stressful time. Like I really felt that my luck had run out. And I had nothing to do, like nothing. And so I started a podcast because I liked having interesting conversations, and I missed, that was so much my teaching had been at university. And, I realized that you can kind of speak to anybody if you say you have a podcast. So I was like, let's do that then.
It wasn't that fashionable then, was it? It was like...
It was still pretty big, but it wasn't like everybody had a podcast.
Yeah, that's what
now
I'm saying.
It's like
yeah. I mean, that time, it was like what Joe Rogan mostly, like people knew about, like the most famous podcaster already.
And I think some journalism podcasts, like the mainstream news services had moved into podcasting.
Yeah,
so it was it was a reputable thing. It wasn't just fringe anymore.
Yes.
But yeah, it wasn't that... there was still space essentially to compete, quite frankly. So I started, and over the course of that, everything just changed. I mean, I interviewed the woman who exposed the largest financial corruption scandal in the history of the world, which is when the Malaysian former Prime Minister, Najib, and his cohort siphoned off millions and millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars from the Malaysian people. And through the devastation of the rainforest on Borneo. And it went into the pockets of like Leonardo DiCaprio and with The Wolf of Wall Street and Miranda Kerr and her crystal piano. And it was crazy how this like corruption touched everybody. And that interviewing her led me to me working for her. And I became producer of Radio Free Sarawak, which is the only independent news show in Malaysia run by Indigenous people for Indigenous people with, central support from Europe. And I was essentially, I didn't have a word for it then, but I was being confronted with systems firsthand. Like I was seeing how political corruption was impacting the resource extraction, and then how resource extraction was impacting indigenous communities, and how also it was impacting like the local climate. And so they were experiencing, increasing flooding, and because the forests had been cut down, the soil couldn't handle the flooding, and so entire villages were being washed away. And then I was seeing, this international corruption about how the international community essentially ignored it because they need the resources that's coming out of Malaysia. And how, economics was, driving that. So it was like all of these pieces were fitting together, and I was in the middle of it, reporting on it. And at the same time, I was doing this podcast, which was increasingly about capitalism. And then essentially I interviewed a guy called Steve Keen, and he just knocked it into place, like capitalism and ecology, essentially economic. And also my journalism, at the same time, everything just like clicked into place.
Together.
And I went, and I went, oh, it's energy, ecology, and economics. That's like the intersection of that is what drives the world. And it's this lack of understanding of the intersection that is making it impossible to seemingly actually achieve anything and do anything impactful. And so I rebranded all my work. I became a climate corruption journalist, investigating the corruption that drives the climate crisis. The podcast became about that intersection. And I'd been doing it for like 10 months by that point, and it hadn't really gotten further than like my extended network. And I swear, overnight with that rebrand, it just started to go. People were finding it and being like, this makes sense. This speaks to what I intuitively know about the world, or the hunches that I've had. And it's all just been one, really pleasant merry-go-round from then, like world exclusives, better, episodes. Each episode, like the guest always platforms somebody else. And so I never actually reach out to anybody new. It kind of creates this like ecosystem of thought, essentially, which is really lovely, and everybody's all connected. Led to conference invitations, led to, expertise. I'm now working on a book. Like, nice. I got lucky. I got really lucky. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say luck. It's nice. I think you followed, because I'm a big believer that there's no such thing as luck, in the sense that you're lucky in the sense that if you were at the right place at the right time, so to speak. But at the same time,
that is luck.
That is luck. But then you have people who are, I know, for example, a good friend of mine who was from Afghanistan, and he had to escape Afghanistan with his family. They've done all the journey, through the mountains, and it was like horrible experience. And now he's in France. I try to even figure out what he does, but he's like in mechatronic engineering, something fancy like that. Okay. So for me, you see, is that luck? In the sense, he wasn't lucky, to be through that situation, but the family, his parents, they thought, you know what? No, we want to create our own luck, and I think there is that, what I like to tell, especially the young people, and I speak at schools sometimes and so on. I like to volunteer with these things, and I say, hey, sometimes you will always find a situation in your life where you feel lost. I feel like everybody goes through that sort of thing. Yeah. I've been through that. You've been through that. There's always
the long
something
night
like
of the
that.
Fucking soul.
Exactly. It's painful, but sometimes, I think, because you said something that I sort of tell my kids not to worry. Like, it's like you worry about your peers. It's like, oh, I'm behind my peers, and my peers they've achieved this. How come I haven't achieved that yet? And I think it's really important to kind of ignore that. It's your journey. Your peers have got their journey. You've got your own journey. Just focus on that. And, sooner or later things do work out. But you have to work. You have to work on it. You have to kind of, you have to be creative.
I think, listen, I genuinely believe I was lucky, but of course I had to work as well. Like, Planet Critical has been running for over 4 years. I think I've missed maybe like 4 episodes in that time. It is weekly. That meant I had to prepare for my guests. I had to, figure out how to do all this kind of stuff. And I had to, you have to treat people well when you're interviewing them, and you have to make sure you're there's all these kinds of little pieces of work that that go into it. Now, I created my own job, which meant that I played to my skills. So writing, speaking, thinking on my feet, all of this stuff, I was made for this. This is what I'm really good at. So it's a lot less work than if I was having to like be an accountant with a gun to my head, you know?
Although some people love being accountants.
Well, exactly, but I don't, right? I don't. So it's just, so I think that's what I mean by like, yes, it's hard work, but like when you create your own work, you get to play to your strengths. So like it doesn't feel like a tough slog in the way that when you're being forced to do something that isn't innate to you, it is. But something I've really noticed when people email me, I get a lot of emails as well, being, you know, specifically about kind of like starting out as a writer or a podcaster or whatever. People don't want to do the first bit. They're like, how long until you reached, you know, what, like my podcast is in the top 1% globally. Like how long until you reached that? Or how much, like, where did you do your target ads in order to like gain growth? And I'm like, I haven't spent a single money advertising my show. It has come off the back of doing good work consistently for years. Second of all, I did it for 2 years without earning a penny before it started. Like I said, you know, overnight it started to grow. It did start to grow. Didn't mean I was bloody earning anything from it. Nothing meaningful for years. And it's like people don't want to do that bit of it. They want to like skip to the instant dopamine reward and like financial reward and reputation reward. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's like, you know, TikTok culture has come around to bite us in the ass, or just everybody's got a really short attention span these days. But I worry about that sometimes with young people. Like you're going to have to put the work in, and there's more people on the planet than ever before. So you are less likely to succeed. Like if I started my show now with the amount of more there's so many more podcasts now than before, maybe I wouldn't have succeeded. Maybe I could have done everything the exact same way and maybe I wouldn't have succeeded. So...
But you have to maneuver. I think that's part of the strategy, because effectively, like, because in fact, I started my podcast now. Maybe I'm a little bit late. I don't know. Because for me, I was never into social media or podcasting. I mean, I was a listener. I was a consumer. But, you know, I'm a tech entrepreneur. I just doing my thing, right? Building my startups, doing whatever, pitching for investors, yada, 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 right? So that wasn't kind of my interest. But the only reason it became an interest, because like, sort of like you, when I announced it properly, like you did, bro, I've changed the names because I was just sort of doing random videos here and there just to tell people about AI or whatever. But when in November last year, so November 2024, towards the end, I said, you know what? I decided I want to do a podcast called the CEO Retort, because I'm a CEO ranting about stuff all the time. But what is it I'm ranting about? Well, it turns out I'm the only one, an insider from the world of tech, that says it how it is. I'm not bullshitting. And it's something I've been doing for 10 years, right? And when I announced
you're the only one?
Sorry?
Do you really think you're the only one?
Well, see, now I'm not. I know I'm not. You see, that's the thing. I'm not. You see, that's why I did that's why I started the CEO Retorts, right? Because that's the interesting part. Because until that point, I actually believed that I was the only one, and people did the same.
No.
Well, it's not. It's not. But
this
is the thing.
Sorry. Well, I'm sorry. This is like a very neoliberal thing, I think, right? Like we're never the only one. There's always somebody else. Even if you look at like historical figures that like, you know, like Picasso were young, you know, people who broke theories through, or, you know, or developed movements, they were also developing elsewhere at the same time. I just think it's important to always situate ourselves within an ecology of like, other people are also doing important things.
Well, that's it.
And
this is,
you're not less valuable if you're not the only one.
Well, but that's the thing, you see, and that's, you see, it's good that you brought this up, because see, all of that started to kind of make sense in my head. Because until that point, I'm a tech entrepreneur. Like I am kind of like the Silicon Valley type. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all, the world revolves around me. Right? And it's not because I'm like that by nature, but it's just, this is how you're told. It's like, when you get investors, they're like, they're treating you, oh, he's the new CEO, he's the superstar, yada, yada, yada. It kind of gets to your head without realizing it.
Yeah.
But you see, but the reason why I started to kind of speak out and felt that I was the only one, certainly in my circles here, because it's like AI, as you know, AI now is a huge hype. Everything that you see today in AI isn't new, right? Like I said, my first ever startup, that was in 2002-ish. Guess what we were building? We were building an ad network that was before Google. And guess what we were using to push out content to the right users? AI controlled recommendation systems. Basically what you see in social media today. Exactly the same, right? Obviously now they're more sophisticated. Again, what did we use for the startup that got me into Google Campus with all the other big guys, etc.? We're using AI models, building our own language models, small language models, to be able to detect misinformation, etc., etc. Again, same thing. And so by 2014, we kind of knew what the direction of play is with AI. Like, it was obvious. So some of us were saying that, okay, we need to put a lot of guardrails. There has to be human intervention. You can't just basically put AI out there and, let it decide what is the right thing or the wrong thing, because it can't do that. And you had other people that were saying, actually, no, we should ban AI completely, which I was like, okay, that's bullshit. That's not going to happen. So forget it. But then, of course, you had the Googles, the Metas, or Facebook at the time that were saying, hey, let's quadruple down on that because that can make more cash. Whatever happens to people, well, it couldn't be that bad, surely. And I'm like, oh, God. And that was the kind of the turning point for me, where I realized, like, I'm the kind of person who believes in ethical tech. I believe in responsible innovation, that sort of thing. Not because I'm just a good guy or anything. No, nothing to do with that. You literally build smarter solutions when you actually focus it. If you focus for it to be human-centric, you actually build smarter solutions. Because you have to teach AI to be smarter, to understand humanity, as it were. Whereas what we see right now is what I described lazy AI. It's like saying, hey, forget the guardrails, forget copyright. Oh, it will cause children commit suicide. Whatever. Just put it out there. Put it out there. That's lazy. That's easy. That's not innovation. Hence, I've been ranting about, like, maybe I sound like an old fart to say the proper time we had innovation was like maybe around, I would say 12, 15 years ago. And I got to realize as well that 2010s was the period where we transitioned from experts to grifters. So we had expert-led innovation. So people, the smart people leading innovation. Now we have people like Elon Musk that are basically seen as genius. He's a VC. Sam Altman is a VC. These guys haven't built shit. Right? Yeah. And I'm not attacking them. I'm not saying that they're bad guys. I don't know them, but I'm calling a spade a spade. These guys are not like, say, Demis Hassabis. He's a proper engineer. Even I don't see myself as a proper engineer. I hired the proper engineers. I'm just the scientist, right? With the ideas, but I still learned from that. But I still built companies from the ground up where we kind of prioritize innovation, responsible AI, et cetera, et cetera. So you see, so all of that frustration was just brewing and brewing and brewing. And I think maybe because I started to walk away from VCs, like now I've got no connections, like I've burnt all the bridges. My last company, we just kind of exited it and liquidated everything. Say, hey, just take the fucking money. I'm out of here. Right.
Wow.
And it's like, because I feel, talking about, going back to your points about how everything is so interconnected. And I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that it's all about greed. To me, it feels like it's just people are doing all of these things. It's all that Gen AI stuff. It's not because they give a shit about innovation. It's not because they give a shit about making the world a better place, even though they say it, but it's just a useless cliche from Silicon Valley. They're not actually solving any problems. Gen AI isn't solving any problem. What problem is it solving? It's cool tech. I love it, but it does not solve a problem. Yet, we're throwing all the money at it, talking about energy, the amount of energy they'll have to use to build all these endless, ridiculous data centers that nobody wants. Until now, I don't know if you saw my post on LinkedIn, Microsoft are kind of pulling back now from these AI data centers. So now they want data centers that are more practical, meaning that they can do other stuff. Okay, that makes sense.
I thought Microsoft was building its own nuclear plant. to power
well,
its AI.
But I don't know if you've noticed that, like, there's a lot of the same guys, and now they want to go into energy, right? Nuclear energy, etc.
Because this is a thing, right?
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, so basically, I look at all of that. It's like, who are you actually serving now? You're not serving anybody. You're serving your shareholders. And this is why I started kind of speak out more and more and more. And I started, like I said, do like random videos on YouTube, whatever. But when I announced the CEO Retort on LinkedIn, because I'm not active in anywhere else, just LinkedIn. My following on LinkedIn just went like that. Like in November, I had something like maybe 1,200 followers, whatever. Now I'm approaching 9,000. Zero marketing, like you. Zero marketing, zero everything. And straight away, I started meeting up other CEOs that feel exactly the same. And I'm like, how come I didn't see you? I didn't meet you. I met even Ida Tin. She's the mother of Femtech. So she's the one who created Clue. So again, she raised, another problem that I like to talk a lot about in the podcast is how women are suppressed in tech. So all of the money that's been given away to all these tech startups, barely 2% of them are run by women, right? And I can guarantee you know that as well. There are a hell of a lot more women than 2% in the world of tech. To me, that's suppression. Now, Ida is one of those barely 2%. She raised the thing up to 100 million. But then soon after that, she walked away. And she came to my podcast. She said, yeah, I want to rant about stuff. I was like, God, let's do it. All right. So now it seems that there's definitely, I'm not the only one. Like you said, I'm not the only one. And this is what I love about this podcast. So for me, this podcast is not about, I want to grow it into the next Joe Rogan. I really don't care about that. It's actually kind of turned into kind of like, almost like self-healing for me, but also it opened up my mind about the world. It's like, yeah, as you said, I was a proper tech entrepreneur in the sense like, oh, I'm the only one who thinks like that. Because nobody else around me thinks like that. But actually, as I speak out, open up, other people come in and say, actually, you know what, Tim, I agree because I felt the same. Shit, really? Yeah. Let's talk. And it's just, so, I absolutely hear you in terms of what you said. So, and I think, which kind of brings me nicely to the next question I wanted to ask you. Is like, because obviously now with podcasting, everybody's speaking out. And I feel like now more and more people want to speak out. But perhaps they don't necessarily want to do their own podcasts, etc. So what, what would you suggest that people should do to basically, I suppose, share their frustrations with the world? Because obviously you could go and talk to your politician, but that's not, do they listen? Like right now, for example, with Elon Musk, this whole Elon Musk situation, you probably see in the news how many people are just burning and throwing away their Teslas, and it's impacting Tesla's revenue now and share price, etc. And I'm like, wow, see, that is powerful. So what do you feel that...
I don't know if that is powerful. Like, Tesla's cars isn't where it makes its money. It makes its money in carbon offsetting. So, like, it's a beautiful image. It's people burning their cars, but like you have to think about these things like systemically, and also it's a very small portion of the American population that have the revenue, first of all, to have a Tesla, and then again to like get rid of it just like that and get a different car. So,
well, I think they're more worried about the share price. They want the share prices of Tesla to just go down because that's where he gets his fortunes from, right? Or presumed fortunes. So I think that's basically what they're looking at.
I would love that too, but I imagine that his new best friend will just give him government contracts to keep, the share price up. So I'm always interested in like, what are things that sort of everybody can do? And I think with regards to kind of people sharing their frustrations, the first thing I would want is for everybody to shut the fuck up for a second. Like, your opinion is not the most important opinion. Your opinion is valid when it's sort of connected into a community. So, share your frustration about your company, the company you work for abandoning its climate policies to the board. Go and speak to other employees, find out if there's a way that you can organize together, present it to the board. If that doesn't work, present it to journalists, but you have to be strategic about it. Like shouting out on the void, shouting into the void on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever, it's meaningless. And equally, complaining to your friends isn't actually achieving anything either.
Exactly.
So people really need to think that every word that you say is a method of communication, has the potential to connect and engage and deploy, essentially.
To achieve some sort of action, like some sort of outcome at the end of it.
Totally. I think that people very often forget like the most important place where they can begin, which is their own backyard. Who are your neighbors? What are the problems that impact all of you? What's a problem in your district, in your locale? How can you get involved? How can you support people is another great way. Like rather than thinking about like what's wrong with your life, like how can you support people with their lives? Because that might also be beneficial to you in some way. But I think that this is really going to demand, again, this thing of people decentering themselves. Like none of us are the center of the world. We're all this like entangled mesh, this like social ecology that's tied into the planet's ecology. And so if you shut up for a second, you might hear other people, like somebody else might have already figured out the message and is deploying it really effectively. And if you shut up, you might be able to hear it and get involved. I worry sometimes about the kind of the egoic drive, across all kinds of movements to be the center or for somebody's idea. I want to change the world. I consider myself a good person. I want to heal the planet or fix politics or whatever, but it has to be me. It has to be my idea. And I don't want anybody else to meddle with it.
There's a bit of narcissism. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And like, I get it, right? We're literally, suckled on the teat of that system in the Western world, but it's not helpful. So if you want to complain, shut up first, I think, and then figure out exactly where it is that being complaining would be an act of resistance and protest and possibility.
And I'm wondering, do you think, because obviously you've covered corruption a lot, and I think it's quite obvious for us to say, like, we don't even have to be politically correct about it, that America now is a kakistocracy, oligarchy, absolutely filled to the brims with corruption from left, right, and center. And the thing that I find interesting, that now finally it seems like the voters are taking notice, including the MAGA voters, not the hardcore, like they're hardcore people in any direction, but like because I'm seeing more and more reports of how, the MAGA supporters, for example, that they're protesting or they're, talking to their, Republican representative, and they're like absolutely, booing them to hell, etc. And it's like, the first thought that came to my mind, why are they surprised that this is happening? Because he literally did say he's going to do all of these things. I even made an episode about it, like in August 2024, right? It's about Project 2025. And it's like, I feel that they just felt, yeah, we know that he said that, but he would not do that to me. Which goes back to the point that you have. It's like everybody feels that the world just revolves around them. And I'm just wondering, because obviously it's a big problem. And maybe, again, this is my tech brain thinking, what's the solution? I'm not sure if there's a solution, right? But obviously, I'm wondering if there's a silver lining here, that now people realize that, you know what, I thought that he's not going to do that thing to me because I'm the voter. He would do it to the others. Oh, he wouldn't deport me, but he will deport others. Now, holy shit, he's doing it to everybody, me included. Do you think that could be a wake-up call that the world needs? Or people are too stupid to kind of, like, for history to repeat itself, as we tend to do?
Boy, I don't know if people are stupid, but like our education systems massively fail us. I think that's an important distinction. Yeah. Of course, like, yes, there's an opportunity for there to be an actual intersectional, political movement of people from all different kinds of political identities to kind of go, hey, we're the majority, and like them up there are really trying to screw us. That's going to be difficult for lots of different reasons. You're going to essentially be asking MAGA voters to like abandon their identity in order to do so, which is a huge ask. And then you're going to be asking the left to abandon their politics of liberal identity politics that they've developed over the past 15 years, which is a huge ask. So it's an opportunity. I think it's a slim one. I think the other danger is that we're really seeing this now is like Trump is taking all the heat as this like, what's the word? Extreme or fringe figure, right? Whereas like, yeah, this is what political systems have been doing. Like democracy has been functioning like this because it's been so tied up in a system, a capitalist system of economics. It does exploit and it does extract and it does see everything in the world purely as a financial value, and it doesn't value human relationships and it doesn't value ecological relationships, and it doesn't really value anything like life itself, right? You know, our system of industrialized capitalism has created a planet where the mass of dead things now outweighs the mass of living things. We're living on a planet that is more dead than alive, you know? So like Trump is just the latest installation of, or the latest embodiment of that system, but it has always been present. Like when the inauguration happened and people were talking a lot about fascism, I wrote a piece about how fascism has always been present because we have a fascistic relationship towards the natural world where we see it as something that should be shaped by us, something that we deserve to have control over, that we have this divine right to have control over and extract and shape and transform into a very narrow vision of perfection, i.e., you know, sort of mechanical development. That's fascistic. That's fascist aesthetics. And it's been present all along. So it's not that like, oh God, fascism is resurged. Like, no, if you don't actually uproot fascism at its very core, it will always come back given the opportunity and attack, you know, human identities. Because what's the difference between a human identity, an animal identity, a plant identity? It's all just stuff to be extracted. So I worry that like he is kind of being such a caricature of, you know, the manifestation of our systems that people will look to it as like it being a Trump problem rather than it being a systemic problem.
Yes, that's actually an excellent point because I had a similar discussion, although on a different topic. It's AI related, but as you know, the UK, they're trying to mess around with the copyright laws. In the UK, we never had issues with copyright laws. We've got the best entertainment and creative industry in the world. So the copyright law worked really fine. However, the Labour government that you would expect to be more pro-regulation, well, they've got VCs basically sitting next to Keir Starmer advising him. And now they actually, at the time of the recording today, is the deadline to submit the, you know, whatever, what are they called? The copyright response thing. So basically, they launched a consultation, which is like, if you don't launch consultations just to show, we're actually doing something, but fuck you. We're actually going to get rid of copyright. Well, not get rid of them, but compromise them so that the AI companies can train their models more. So that kind of proves your point there. So the fact that, it's a more left-leaning government, but it is still part of that very same system that does not give a shit about your creativity or your right of ownership or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like left and right is still existing within the framework of the same economic model and political model. It's still, you know, capitalist fueled democracy, which turns out isn't particularly democratic when, you know, capitalism infers huge amounts of power on different people and extracts from the natural world. So it's just not the case. I think that there was a really exciting moment of politics in the 50s and 60s, essentially, when like the third world, which is meant to be 1, 2, 3, like the next, rather than the bottom, was emerging, and there was this real like socialist kind of alliance across African nations and Asian nations that had just gotten their independence from the colonial powers, and you know that they were doing so well because that spoke to people. It spoke to people inherently, like that's the way that we want to be governed, and you know your capitalist nations, primarily the United States, went in and like toppled those regimes very deliberately because they were such a huge threat. And since then, we've just existed in this bubble of, you know, neo-colonial, neoliberal rule, whereby like, the options on all, I mean, no wonder people voted for Trump, quite frankly, or no wonder they voted for Brexit. They're so fucking bored of being presented with the same thing over and over and over again, no matter who they vote for.
And
things
their lives
aren't
don't
getting
get better. Yeah.
Exactly. Their lives aren't the rich are getting richer. Their lives aren't getting better. Everything's going to shit. Our cities are going to shit. Our public services are going to shit. The banks get bailouts while people lose their homes. It doesn't matter who we vote for. It's all the same. And then somebody else comes along, or a different campaign goes along, and it's essentially this big shiny red button. And you're like, I don't know what will happen if I press it, but at least I have the opportunity to press something now, to actually feel engaged in some way. And because people are we are political, we are communal, we do know how to live with one another, we do know how to we do want some element, maybe not of control, but sovereignty, autonomy, respect for the love of God. So those are the sort of focuses that need to become the primary source of interest for political institutions going forward. How can we give power back to people? Because if we don't give power back to people, they are going to vote until they destroy themselves. Essentially, they're going to tear down their political systems by way of destroying themselves, first of all, because they're sick of being rats in cages, I think.
I'm just wondering, because I know we're approaching the end.
Sorry.
Because I suppose a similar situation happened, obviously, in the 1800s, and the way it ended was through a revolution, right? And I can't remember who said it. Oh my God. I forgot. One major academic, he said it in a podcast recently that he actually believes, if things get worse and worse and worse, and they are, there will be a point where people will go out in the streets and effectively start some sort of a revolution. And I'm wondering, because as a way to finish this, what can change the system? Because obviously the system hasn't changed. And as I said earlier, in my opinion, early 2010s was the period where basically the public started to say, you know what, fuck the innovators, fuck the experts, go after the grifters. And the key reason for that, of course, the financial crash that happened just a few years before that. So that's basically the consequence of, where we are today. It's the consequence of the failure of the system of looking after the people at that time. So I'm just wondering what can happen now to change the system that would serve the people if, according to this guy, it's a revolution. And I obviously hope it's not a revolution, because that revolutions lead to a lot of deaths and destruction, etc. Exactly. So, but I guess my question is,
so is
today. The other way.
Today is bloody. It's like, I can't remember the number, but it's I think it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are dying every year from air pollution.
Yeah.
This is deadly. This system that we live in today, this industrialized, neoliberal system, is absolutely deadly. Look at the mental health crisis. The rates of suicides in men going through the roof. The rates of sexual assault against women going up again in the Western world. We're not okay.
No.
So it's not either revolution is scary because people die, or this. It's people are dying. Revolution is also scary because people die. But it's,
but
it's
suppose
not
you
that
can't
one
see it, because revolution is you see it in the streets, it's there,
exactly.
It's scary.
Heads roll. Yeah. I think that what's really important to remember is that the system is always changing, right? So neoliberalism is not the exact same as capitalism. It's like a deregulated capitalism, and that has knock-on effects. And then a neoliberal model that is sort of bloated with wealth, from digital services like Silicon Valley, that's also a little bit different. So it's always changing. What is going to bring it to its knees is if we don't do something, the planet's systems are going to collapse in this century. And then our human economy will collapse with it, because our human economy is nothing more than an extraction of natural resources. And if those systems start to collapse, then there's not the same stability upon which to grow our economy, right? So it's gonna change in this century. There's no steady state here. We just have to essentially decide: is it gonna change because we're gonna be impacted by the planet? Are we going to try and impact the planet in a positive way and see that change? I think generally speaking, like, people alone don't have a lot of power on like a national level or an international level, but they have a fair amount of power on a kind of local level. And I think that's where people should be focusing their attentions. Like, where are you? What is your territoria, which is a Colombian concept for everything in the land, not just territory, but like ghost and spirit and history. And
yes,
how can you improve your community's energy resilience and energy sovereignty? How can you improve your community's food sovereignty? How can you ensure that you're going to have access to fresh water going forward? How can you begin to impact local politics, etc., etc.? Like, there's a kind of a ruggedization that needs to happen because things aren't going to get very bad. If we continue as we are, things are going to get very, very, very bad. And I think a decentralized economic system, where in a world in which we don't have IP, but like knowledge is shared, knowledge is generated and shared, and resources are shared, and local communities have autonomy and decision making over their futures and get to invest in what they want to give back to the world. You know, a political and economic system based on mutuality and reciprocity. That is the only way to support 8 billion people.
Do you see it happening?
8 billion people, unlimited growth.
Do you see it happening right now? Like,
it exists. Yeah. Most people are living in those systems. Most people around the world are living in those economies, local economies of mutuality and reciprocity. It's a small fraction of the human population that first of all exists in like purely capitalist frameworks. Like, the global north is not that big. Have a lot of money, but it's not that big population wise. And then it's an even smaller amount of people that are actually benefiting from that. So I think it's really important to remember there are multiple worlds on this planet already. Yeah. And like, most people are living in reciprocal economies because that is how you survive when you don't have resources or labor to exploit. And most people don't have resources or labor to exploit. So, and that's why I think if we continue and the world economy crashes by 70%, which is what the Faculty of Actuaries are warning, then it will be the communities in the global south, a lot of them, that are better prepared to ride that out than those of us in the global north who are wholly dependent on this external extraction and provision of goods, essentially.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Well, I guess on that note, where can people find you? What are you up to these days, apart from the podcast?
So people can find me on, if you want more of this kind of talk, planetcritical.com, where I investigate why the world is in crisis. There's a weekly podcast and newsletter. And then I've also just launched a documentary series investigating what to do for a world in crisis, which is at planetcoordinate.com. And the first film will be out later this year. My partner and I are spending the entire year traveling around the global south making these films. We have 2 films on SD cards that are waiting to be edited and put out into the world. And in the meantime, we are releasing written reports, so you can still see what we're up to.
That's on Substack as well.
Yeah, both on Substack.
Cool. So for the listeners, all the links are in the description as usual. But yeah, Rachel, absolute pleasure. I wish we had longer time, but yeah, I'm sure we're going to chat again 100%. Definitely, Tim. I think, my goodness, there's so much that is happening. And I think the world of tech specifically, obviously that's my world, is becoming more and more responsible for that right now, especially with all the crazy investments in data centers and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, definitely we'll chat again very soon.
Thanks very much, Tim. Right. It's great to be with you. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and a lot to think about. And as I said, it's a bit of an overview. Of course, we could delve into every single element that we talked about in a lot more detail. And most likely we're going to have multiple discussions in the future for sure. But the one advice I really want to give you, and I kind of alluded to that at the beginning of this episode as well, that you absolutely need to be in touch with what's going on in the world today. I think one of the reasons why corruption, be it climate corruption, energy corruption, political corruption, you name it, it's because people who are involved in these corruptions, they are absolutely taking advantage of people's ignorance. You know, because we live in a world that is so interconnected, as Rachel highlighted, that for you to simply ignore certain elements of what's going on in the world because you just don't want to think about it, but you just want to think about whatever it is that you're interested in, I'm afraid that's not going to work anymore. We are so interconnected. And of course, now AI is a big part of that. It's impossible for you to ignore what's going on. And some people even complain to me on LinkedIn because my community is growing and people kind of, they started following me, I think mostly because of AI. But then when I start to get a little bit political, they start thinking, Tim, I know it's LinkedIn. Why are you talking about politics? But then I explain to them and they accept this argument that actually I'm not being political because I have interest in politics. I'm being political because politics have become part of everything that we do today, whether you like it or not. And as an entrepreneur, I actually learned the hard way, and I'm going to have a whole episode discussing this actually. I learned the hard way that if you ignore politics, it will absolutely come back and bite you in the ass. And I think it's really important that you keep yourself informed. And you can use tools like Ground News, but ultimately you can use whatever strategy that works for you. So for me, like I said earlier, I go over all the stories. I listen to some podcasts, including Rachel's podcast, and I just try to keep myself informed just to see what's going on. And part of your business planning should be understanding political crises, economic crises, environmental crises, like the pandemic, for instance, as well. Now, I do know many of you who follow me on LinkedIn and follow me on this channel are young budding entrepreneurs. And of course, I do know that you get a lot of advice, the usual stuff about having a business plan, which is all right, depending what you have in that business plan. But of course, part of your business plan, you've got to have things like SWOT analysis, your financial forecast, your cash flow forecast, P&L, etc. All of that is great. Your marketing plan, etc. All of that's fantastic. But I always tell people that we live in a world where you must add 4 extra things. Number 1, you must have some kind of plan around AI, be it your data strategy, your AI strategy, depends on the business that you're in, but it has to be part of your plan, because if it's not, and your competitors figure out how to use AI to their advantage, you're finished. Your business will be irrelevant. And I've been saying this for the past 6 years at least. The second thing you have to think about is the geopolitical risks. For example, look what we've seen with the tariffs, what we've had here in the UK with Brexit. All of these things have destroyed businesses in their thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands around the world even. Okay. So you've got to understand these things. Of course, you must have also economic risks directly resulted from geopolitical risks. And now, unfortunately, that we have Donald Trump in power and a guy that runs his healthcare department who's an anti-vaxxer. I never thought that I would say this, but I'm afraid you need to have now a potential pandemic risk. And you need to plan that. You need to think about what will happen if there's another pandemic. There's already outbreaks in America now from diseases that shouldn't even exist. But that's the world that we live in today. And all of that is part of the things that Rachel was talking about, connecting the dots, the multiple crises that we're surrounded with. And it's all man-made. It's all man-made. Let's just not pretend otherwise. We screwed things up. So the question is, what do we do about it? And I think having discussions like this are really important, because we're not just talking, we're also talking about potential solutions. Because ultimately, my friends, and I've been saying this for so many years now, that it is up to us as people to fix this problem now. We can't rely on the others. We can't rely on the so-called leaders. Okay, some of them are genuine. They're trying their best, but the reality is the system is so screwed up now that we just, we just have to do it ourselves. I mean, what else is there? That's the only hope. We are literally a bunch of frogs in boiling water, and the people at the top are increasing the temperature, wanting to turn the water into lava. So we can carry on pretending that these people are going to care and they're just not going to increase the temperature, or at least we collectively can get the hell out of the boiling water altogether, or at least do our best to make sure that the temperatures don't go up. So that's the reality. And it's a sad reality. It's a tough reality, but nonetheless, it's the reality that we must face if we really are serious about solving these problems. So these are my final thoughts, guys. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And again, as always, make sure you support this channel so we can spread this message. And again, big thanks to Rachel, who's right in the middle of filming her documentary, and I can't wait to see it. And of course, we will have another discussion after that, because I think she's going to be revealing some pretty interesting things. So, my friends, until next time, stay safe, stay positive. Let's fix this together. Peace.